screen. And I'll hand over now to Caroline.
Thanks very much, Helen, and welcome everybody to the start of our conference, almost like a conference season that we've been having. And this is the third year that we've done it like this for fairly obvious reasons. And yeah, we have online presentations today and for the following 3 weeks, and then in the final week of June we will have some in-person networking sessions, and Helen will talk through a lot more about that this afternoon. So I'm going to start by thanking Microlink and Brain in Hand as our key sponsors, but also ClearLink's educational guidance service, Glean, Aspire and the Royal Agricultural University for their sponsorship too for this year's conference. So I'm going to reflect a little bit on the last year of NADP, what we've done, and you know, what we are planning to do for the next year. It's been my first year as chair of NADP, and I shall reflect on that too. So we have been quite busy reaching out to our members. We've had, for example, a couple of webinars. Last September, we opened our sort of webinars for members only, with one on reflecting on the progress of sender legislation and how that's had an impact on our work at universities. And then more recently, last week, in fact, there was a webinar hosted by Cambridge University, that was a complete mistake, sorry, by, and I've written the wrong thing down here as well, by, someone help me, because I was there, but I can't remember, Leicester.
That was De Montfort.
De Montfort, DMU, sorry, yeah, wrote the wrong thing down, by DMU, which was around decolonizing the disability services, which was an excellent webinar. Both of them were. We've continued providing our Working Effectively with Autistic University Students training, and we've done a couple of those over the last year, which have gone down very well, and have had lots of participants who have gained CPD points through doing that as well. We've also been working in collaboration with Employment Autism to produce for employers a similar sort of autism course, and they contacted us, having been aware of the one that we were running, and so we have been working with them. So we've also produced a report responding to the spelling and grammar situation, which I'm sure you'll all be aware of, and the Office for Students report. And we've also worked with Lord Holmes, who was putting together a DSA report for the House of Lords, which NADP and many other member organisations added to as part of what we do, really, in terms of reaching out and responding to current things that are going on. We've also been involved with DFE and their initiative to introduce the disability passports, and we've also responded to member concerns around apprenticeships and written a report that brings all those membership concerns together. And this will also be tackled in the third week of this year's conference. So we've been working with UCAS as well since 2016, and they have just launched their applications for this year and included much more social model language, and that's as a result of some of the work that NADP have done with you. And finally, and most recently, we've produced a document setting out the main aspects and key findings of the Bristol University County Court judgment. And we'll be holding a network event for heads of services next week to discuss that. So that's some of the things that we have done in the last year. So as a board of directors, as membership involvement, obviously we have been very busy. It's been a tough year in lots of ways for universities returning back to some on-site working and making those decisions about how we best support students in our sector. I'm thinking about what we are going to be doing in the future. So we're looking at providing more training. This is kind of in response to member requests, and looking particularly at training for around ADHD in a similar way that we provide the autism training. And yeah, that's something brand new for us, and we're just beginning to get that together. And we're looking at providing shorter training models as well. And I mentioned the free network event for heads next week. We're also going to be doing more of those, and there will be a networking event in September, which is currently also being advertised, which will be really for people who've joined disability services, their HEIs, in the last couple of years, and bringing new people together. Perhaps you might be new to the sector or something new about your job. And we're also looking at the old skill advisors handbook and updating and renewing that, and be really great to hear from you if you are interested in writing a chapter or contributing to a chapter. So that's kind of concluding my reflection on NADP. Before I hand over to Helen, though, I'm going to announce the winner of this year's race, which was a duck race for the conference. And the winner for this year is Gwen Thomas from the University of Greenwich, and the office will be contacting Gwen, because I believe that Gwen isn't on this call today, to provide the prize, which are high street vouchers, I think. So yeah, thanks very much for attending this year's conference. Any questions generally about NADP, you can contact the office admin at nadp-uk.org, and if you and they can be then sent to either myself as chair or one of the board of directors, or indeed our office team and our executive director Lynn, who can field and report on questions, take membership suggestions, etc. So it'd be lovely to hear from as many of our members as would like to get in touch with us over the next year. And I'm going to hand over to Helen now, who will kick off this year's NADP conference. Thanks, Helen.
Great, thanks, Caroline. Well, yeah, it's been a busy year, as we've heard. So thank you, Caroline, for your leadership as well. As a director of NADP myself, we've really valued your input this year. Welcome to you all to our opening session of the NADP Annual Conference 2022. Just to reiterate Caroline's thanks to our sponsors. So our whole conference sponsors this year are Microlink and also Brain in Hand. So thank you very much to them. We equally would like to give thanks to our sponsors for this particular session this week, which is the Educational Guidance Service. So thank you to you too. Just to remind people, there will be a captioned recording that's going to be put up after this event on the NADP website. It will be done as soon as possible afterwards, so do have a look there for those of you who want to revisit any content, or also please feel free to share with your colleagues that maybe couldn't make it today. We also have, just to draw your attention to some great videos that are already pre-recorded for this week to accompany the sessions today that are on the NADP website. So do have a look at those. There's one from AbilityNet on transitional support for students, also from UCAS, and also a presentation by Caroline Huntley. So do have a look at those, like I say. So the overarching theme of this year's conference is Lost in Transition, Ensuring Inclusivity at Times of Change. And this session, this opening session, is on transition into further and higher education. This forms part of a series of events that we are running through June. So for the first 4 weeks of June, including today's, it is an online remote conference offering, which is free of charge. We also, quite excitingly, have the 5th week of June, a number of different events that are in person, actual in-person events. So do have a look at the details of those. We've got one in University of Arts London. We've got one at University of Ulster in Northern Ireland. We've got a third event that's in Napier, Edinburgh Napier University in Scotland. And then finally, last but not least, we've got one in Swansea at Swansea University in Wales. So do get yourselves booked onto those. There is a small fee for attending the in-person conferences, just to let you know. So we've tried to keep it as minimal as possible, and hopefully it's not prohibitive for people. I'm conscious that budgets are constantly being squeezed, but we've kept it at £50 for the in-person event. So do have a look at that. There are limited places, so try and book fairly promptly to guarantee your place. Right, so in terms of next steps, we've got this event today, which, as I say, is transition into further and higher education. I'm delighted to welcome 3 brilliant speakers today. So we've got Helen Duncan, who is the Senior Neurodiversity Specialist at the University of Cambridge. And Helen will be talking to us about the transition event that they run at Cambridge and how that was developed. We've also got Rachel Healy, who is from the University of Leeds, and she will be talking to us about transitional support for students there. And then finally, again, last but not least, we've got Marius Frank, who is the Head of Education at Microlink. So he will be talking about the very complex area of how do we support unidentified needs during transition for students when we don't necessarily know what those needs are. So on that happy note, I'd like to hand over to our first presenter. The other thing to just note, sorry, before I forget, after each presentation, there'll be a Q&A section straight after relating to that presentation. Given time, there will also be chat for general discussion and time for that at the end. But Helen, who's presenting first, does have to leave shortly after her presentation. So do make sure if you've got specific questions for Helen, try and get them in to the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen for her before she heads off. But if not, if you think of something after, I'm sure we can send them on to her. So anyway, I'd like to welcome Helen Duncan.
Thank you. Thanks, Helen. I hope everyone can hear me. Anyway, it's a real pleasure to be here. I'm going to just try and screen share and then sort of start the slideshow. So if you just bear with me, so let's hope I can do this properly. Right. So can everybody see my slides? I'm hoping so. I don't know if anyone could just...
That looks great, Helen. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks. Marvellous. So yeah, thank you so much, Helen, for the introduction. So my name is also Helen Duncan, and I'm from University of Cambridge. I'm the Neurodiversity Advisor there. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a project that we did, which was a co-design project where students actually designed the transition event themselves. So students for whom the event was designed, was intended, were actually the designers of the event. So unfortunately now I seem to have frozen up. Oh, there we go. So just really starting with a little bit of background to the event. In fact, I'm going to slightly go back a slide because it seems to have jumped. There seems to be problems. I'm having problems actually getting this to move. Sorry about this. If anybody is there with my slides, I'm just wondering whether, there we go. It seems to be a lot of technical issues, but I'll do my best. And if necessary, I'll have to hand over to Helen to pull the slides up at their end, but we'll keep going. So just, yeah, the talk really, I'm just going to cover background to a transition event because I'm very aware that most universities do this anyway. And just to rationalise, the rationale for why we decided to go for a co-design approach and what we did, what the methodology was, the outcomes, and just some reflections. So in terms of background, as I say, most universities do put on a transition event, and the idea of that is really to orient, it's an orientation day for disabled students as they're coming into the university. And the idea really is that it's a supportive experience to support them through that early transition stage from school to university, and to make sure that they know what support is available. I mean, for us at Cambridge, but obviously at any university that they're attending. And in terms of why we think this is an important thing to do across the sector, so we know from the research that the transition into higher education is particularly challenging, particularly so for disabled students. And we need to be really looking at how can we reduce those barriers that they tend to encounter during the university transition. And there's a lot of research that suggests that getting the support right at that stage can really be helpful in terms of retention rates and making sure that students don't drop out at this very early stage. In terms of the background to the project itself and how we kind of came up with it, we were in a situation, and I don't think it's probably unique to Cambridge, but we're in a situation where we've been putting transition events on every year for students for a lot of years. I've been with the university for about 14 years, and we've been doing it for as long as I've been there. But the event itself and the programme that we were delivering was very much devised by, as well as delivered by, the staff at the Disability Centre. So I was developing a programme aimed at students with specific learning difficulties, and my colleague was developing programmes for students with autism, and for students with mental health conditions, etc. But it was very much staff driven. And not rather than student centred. And we were very aware, because of principles of participatory principles and emancipatory principles, that actually these events should be devised, developed and delivered by the students for whom the event was actually put on for. With the university staff just simply acting as facilitators, making sure that it can happen, but the rest of it actually should be developed by disabled students themselves. So that's where the project kind of was kind of born from. So the idea was to develop this transition event that actually did meet the requirements of the users themselves, but also really developed this sense of ownership and self-determination, a sense of belonging. In terms of the general principles that we used before we even started, is what we wanted was a really user-centered but a systematic kind of design thinking approach. And that the researcher characteristics should actually reflect the characteristics of the users themselves. So those researchers that developed this event were themselves identified with characteristics of specific learning difficulties, autism, mental health conditions, as well as physical and sensory impairments. We did, I think, quite importantly, pay the students as co-researchers, because I think that really recognised the value of their research and the fact that we respected them actually as researchers, because obviously other researchers are always paid, and we didn't want this to be any different. In terms of the idea of design thinking, we kind of looked to what was happening in industry with design thinking. When industry develops something, an event or a product from scratch, what is the actual design thinking principle? So we used this sort of what's called a double diamond approach, where you start off with the idea of designing the right thing and hopefully end up with designing things right. And it breaks it down into how do you do the kind of, discovering what are the issues and what you want to do through research, so that it always is there's an evidence-based practice, coming up with the ideas and then synthesizing them and sort of really, that's the sort of defining stage. Then bringing those ideas together to develop and then implement the event itself. So that was a sort of industry standard design thinking approach that we kind of used to sort of as an underpinning principle. And in terms of what we actually did, we had 12 students who acted as researchers, and there were 3 students actually facilitating the whole project. And it was done in the form of focus groups. And so there were 3 sessions, of which there were 12 students, which were broken down into 3 focus groups within those sessions. And we did it across the summer just in order to make sure that it wasn't actually, encroaching on student work, on their exams or their study. And so the first session, we were looking at sort of that diamond 1, defining what the model of a transition event should be, starting from scratch, what should the model be of a transition event? Then the second focus group, the sort of second diamond, was then developing what the program should be and how it should actually be delivered. And then the third focus group, diamond 2, was developing the materials and the resources. Oh, I think I've rather stuck again. Sorry. We've run back into technical problems and for some reason it's stuck. So we don't seem to be moving forward. In a minute, it's going to just jump on hugely because I'm pressing every button there is. I don't know whether there's anybody that can take over and...
Yeah, sorry, Helen. Joe's going to, I think Joe's going to take over sharing.
Yeah, if I stop, I'm really sorry about this, everybody, but if I stop sharing and Joe takes over, but I'm pressing the forward and backwards buttons, but nothing's happening. Thank you. Thanks, Joe. Could you go to the next slide? Great, that's lovely. So as part of the focus groups, what we did is we provided the students with a persona of a student who is transitioning into the university with, say, a specific learning difficulty or with, say, a mental health condition, because that allowed the focus groups or the researchers in the focus groups to be able to talk about it from the point of view of the persona if they preferred. I mean, they were absolutely allowed to use their own experience if they wanted to, but what we didn't want to do is put people in a position where they had to say, oh, as a student with dyslexia, when I was coming into the university, these were things that I was concerned by. They could say, speaking from the point of view of the persona, I think these are things that this individual may have concerns about. And the facilitators modelled using either approach, so students could, were very comfortable with either using one or the other. The students themselves developed the questions to kind of frame the discussions in each of the topic areas. So they both developed and framed those discussions. And then they selected any ideas they wanted to go forward. And they did it through anonymous voting, just so there wasn't any kind of peer pressure on which ideas actually were the preferred ones. So that was sort of anonymous voting afterwards. And then the sort of themes and the ideas that kind of emerged from each of the focus groups were written up, sent back to the participants, just so that we could recheck that we had authentically represented the views and their thoughts and opinions. Can I have the next slide? Sorry, could we move slides, Joe? Thank you, thanks. So in terms of what came out of it, why is a transition event important? What are they saying are kind of the main issues when you're transitioning from school to university? And what they identified in terms of some of the key issues were the need for self-advocacy, the lack of confidence, and the fact that that anxiety uses up a lot of time, both emotional energy, but also physical time that they could actually be using to much better effect. That sense of isolation and feeling different and othered, and the imposter syndrome that goes with them, that I shouldn't really be here because I have these problems and I've been masking or feel like I need to mask. But not knowing what adjustments are possible, what is the art of the possible, knowing that adjustments are needed, but what actually can be done. And also, who do you go to get them? So who is responsible? The amount of administration that's associated with the support that's available is quite considerable, as we all know. So organising disabled student allowances, exam arrangements, and there's not a one-stop shop. So it's not like you can just go to one place, just do it in the one moment and everything's done. You're having to, do all these things in very different ways with very different people and explaining it all from scratch, and probably having to provide diagnostic evidence all over again, numerous times. Could I have the next slide, Jo? So again, need to be proactive. So they're having to disclose and also explain their requirements. So rather than having their tutors coming up to them and saying, how can I help? They're having to actively approach that tutor to say, this is my diagnosis. These are the requirements that I have, and having that discussion, which obviously can be quite intimidating. And just knowing what you need to do, who you need to go to, and sort of getting going with that. Understanding, I've put here Cambridge, but any university, the expectations are different to the expectations of school. Finding your way around is confusing, social anxiety, a lot of unpredictability and unknown because it's such a new environment. And it can be a little bit of potluck as to whether the members of staff that you come up against actually do understand or don't understand or respect that you are the expert in your experience and asking kind of the right questions. So it is very variable. And some things that can seem quite small can have quite a big effect. So even things like, a heavy door, which other people might think is a minor thing, can actually have quite a big impact on people. Could I have the next slide, Jo? So what did they come up with? What did they actually say that they felt they wanted? And interestingly, what they wanted was a multiple day conference style event. So they wanted to kind of arrive a bit earlier than the main cohort and have a whole range of sessions that they could choose from across 3 days of the event. And those sessions would include information events as well as social events and impairment specific events, as well as events that are generally about being a student with a sort of focus on disability. They wanted it to be sort of a bit of a hybrid event, partly online and partly in person, but also having some training so that when they are working online or accessing online, that they know how to really engage with that in a very productive way. And having people who can attend remotely if they're not able to be there in person at the same level, in the same way that people can engage when they're there in person. But also to have that real buzz of a conference. So having the kind of stands that we're used to seeing when we go to a conference, book stands and student union stands and all of those things. So that kind of makes them feel it's primarily about being a student who's arriving at the university. So could I have the next slide, Jo? They want the event to be inclusive and accessible, and I think often we think that we are doing that, and we often are not necessarily doing that as well as we should be. So one of the kind of big no-nos was don't put everybody in one big room. Now everyone arrives and they're all sort of ushered into one very large hall. Don't do it. Making sure it's accessible online as well as in person. And for the event to be very clear about what its purpose is and what are the components of the event, how they actually really promote that purpose. A lot of focus on self-advocacy, because students do need to be proactive when they get here, and having a lot of support in being able to achieve that. And using a very interactive workshop delivery style rather than PowerPoint presentations and people just standing up and delivering information. A real kind of encouragement of a community, so an impairment specific community. There was a lot of the researchers saying that what they would really benefit from is being with other people with that same impairment, going through the same experience, and creating that community. So other students with a specific learning difficulty, other students with autism, but also that they have a subject specific community. So other people who are doing English and other people who are doing natural sciences. A lot of primarily student to student sharing of information. So effectively they feel like they're talking to their older self. And so lots of opportunities to meet and talk to other incoming students with a similar impairment or identity, as well as other students who are current students at the university that have gone through the same steps that they're currently going through. So we'll have the next slide, please, Jo. Thanks. So the thing that came through is being able to take the event as a whole and all the parts of the event that are being offered and take that kind of big picture, but make it their own, making it very bespoke for them as individuals. So having a choice of repeated events so they can work a route through the programme and through the conference itself, the transition event conference, in a way that means that it actually works for them as an individual according to what their individual requirements are. So that also requires having a lot of detailed information about the content of the event, you know, and having a lot of the kind of more generic information on the website. So when they arrive, it's very much about hands-on workshop style bespoke experiences rather than the more generic stuff which can be dealt with on the website in a much more flipped way. But also having a really good map of the event with some suggested routes of ways that that individual might choose, so they understand why they're choosing what they're choosing and how those different components will come together to make the big picture their own picture. Could I have the next slide, please, Jo? Thanks. So on reflection, there were a range of benefits to kind of co-designing the event. A lot of those benefits, I think, were very much around empowerment and developing agency and belonging and sense of community. And the idea of peer-to-peer learning as being such an important aspect of the event, but also the project itself. And what was, I think, a bit of an unexpected outcome of the project was the benefit to the research, the student researchers themselves. And because we had, you know, postgraduate research students, whether they were MPhil or PhD, were working on this research with undergraduate students and really developing research skills along the way. So, you know, the undergraduate students really developed a set of research skills that they wouldn't otherwise have had the opportunity to do so, and learning from their sort of older peers who are just a little bit further in the student journey than they are. But also being able to put that experience of research on their CVs as well. It was a sort of really valuable outcome for them. Next slide, please, Jo. So really, yeah, so that's kind of it from my point of view in terms of, it's a bit of a scamper through what the project was doing, but I hope it gives you a bit of a flavour of it. And, you know, please do ask lots of questions. And these are just a few resources. And Jo, if you wouldn't mind the next screen. And some references, if anybody needs them, if you want to kind of look that up later. And the last slide, I think, Jo. Thanks. Yeah, so any questions?
So just to say, Helen, thank you so much for that brilliant presentation. So much to take away there and think about. I was just reflecting on the events that we run, transition events at Oxford University, where I'm based, and there's definitely things I'm taking from that I'm going to pinch and try and use at our end. We've had one question already from a panelist who's not been able to use the chat function. So if I can ask you that, and other people, please do pop your questions in the Q&A box if you've got anything to ask Helen. So the question is, I'm really interested in your approach with student researchers. Could they choose a persona, or were they allocated one, or could they discuss the point of view of several?
Yes, so probably yes, and yes to all of that, really. So we tried to be as flexible as possible, but what we had done initially is allocate the researchers into subgroups within the focus group. So, for example, there was one group of students who had a specific learning difficulty themselves, and they were given the persona of somebody with a specific learning difficulty because they were talking from that perspective. And that was the same for a group of researchers with mental health conditions, and the group of students with autism, and the group of students with physical and sensory impairment. So they had then, at that point, they had the persona that was associated with the group that they were in. And then we sort of fed back. So they did that sort of I suppose, subgroup, and then joined the larger group afterwards, where you could use any of the personas. So they were given the personas in advance, so it wasn't just sort of on the day. They had plenty of time to kind of look at that and consider that, and they were, you know, welcome to talk from their own perspective, which many of them did talk from their own perspective. I think they felt it was a very safe space to do that, but we didn't want them to be in a position where it was necessary to do that.
Great, thank you. There's some other questions coming in now, thick and fast. So the next one is from Kate. It says, when thinking about getting students together with others with similar issues, how did you deal with intersectionality?
I'm not sure, are we talking here about the transition event itself or the focus group? I'll talk probably about both, really, I think. You know, and I think you're absolutely right. Intersectionality is a really sort of probably an oft forgotten aspect of the work that we do. So again, this, in terms of intersectionality, when we were actually looking at recruiting, we were looking at sort of we were trying to get a sort of broad sense of people at sort of different situations, because there's other things other than just or rather than other than the impairment that's involved here. So there's intersectionality around widening participation, all sorts of areas of intersectionality that sort of also impact on what people want from a transition event. But in terms of, again, within the sort of field of disability, as we know, because you have a specific learning difficulty does not preclude you from any other of the impairments that are also involved. So this is where, whilst we had the subgroups, we also had the larger groups where we were coming together and sharing ideas. So there was the initial sort of smaller group of a single impairment, then coming together in the wider group where we were talking about sort of a cross impairment. And we were looking, in terms of the themes and ideas that came out, we were looking at what are common themes as well as what are very specific. So when it comes to developing the programme as a whole, it encompassed all of those things. So it encompasses workshops and sessions that were very specific to a specific impairment, as well as workshop and sessions which were across impairment and took into account intersectionality. So that was, I think, the idea or the benefit, I think, of having a 3-day rather than a single-day event. It meant that actually all of those things could be embraced rather than it being a choice of either or.
Thanks, Helen. We've got another question here from Catherine, who asks, hi, on evaluation, was there a rise in participation? How were the students recruited?
Rise in participation from the transition event. I think this is where I have to say the unfortunate situation was we then had the pandemic. So in terms of putting this into action, we weren't able to do it in the way that the students had envisaged, in terms of everyone arriving sort of 3 days before, being there in person, because obviously with the pandemic everything went online, so we had to do sort of online versions of the event, which was not the event that they had developed, with the idea that this year we're going to be able to actually do it in person. Through, at the moment, through sort of the a lot of the colleges are doing a lot of events as well, so we're really developing, getting the website side of it right, so that the in-person bit then can sort of sit alongside it. So at this stage we haven't got that hands-on experience because of the pandemic, unfortunately, getting in the way and rather rather putting a spoke in our wheel.
Yeah, okay, so I think you've probably covered this in the last answer, but just to flag, so Marie has said, really interesting project, Helen, thank you. We'll definitely be referring to this in the work we're doing. Has this run live yet? And do you have evaluation feedback from participants? What was their response?
Yeah, and the answer is no, we haven't managed to do it live yet, but that's the next stage. No, we are somewhat behind where we hoped we'd be because of the pandemic. But once we do it live, yes, we are going to do a lot of sort of debriefing and re-evaluation. And I'd really like to do another stage of the project itself with those students to re-evaluate with them what they felt the benefit to them is. So actually sort of drawing back on these researchers that were involved first time round. So there is definitely plans to do that. So yeah, and I'm sure that we'll be sharing that as and when we have that information.
Okay, and similarly then there was someone else who's asked about evaluation, but again I think that's been covered. They were asking can you expand on how you evaluated the success of the events. We've got a further question saying, have you found those students who only attended online transition events have then struggled with attending in-person teaching?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because again, not having actually managed to deliver it sort of as we would like to have done, it's kind of hard to evaluate at this stage. But I think that's generally an interesting question anyway, isn't it, about the experiences that students have been having about being online and how that's going to be impacting in-person attendance, sort of generally. And certainly we're getting some anecdotal feedback from students about that, and I think that's an issue other than about transition, but I think we're definitely getting a lot of sort of anecdotal feedback about students now going into in-person rather than online, and some of the sort of pros and cons of that. Yeah,
we've had a comment in the chat that says again, same person that posted the evaluation question, saying thanks Helen, would be interested in your design of the evaluation too. We've got a question here from Chico. I really enjoyed seeing your approach to design thinking and using the double diamond model. Part of this approach is allowing for iteration. Considering this, are you planning on further focus groups with the same or a different group, and perhaps at different points of the academic year?
Yeah, and I think that's all going to be really, really valuable, because I'd like to see this as an ongoing rather than a sort of single moment in time project. And you know, we were very lucky to get funding for it, so we need to kind of seek more funding so we can do all these continuous stages of continuous evaluation, and also pushing it, you know, sort of taking it further and taking those steps further to reflect on it, reevaluate it, and see what else can be done. I think it's really important for this to be a sort of live, ongoing project rather than just a sort of snapshot moment in time. Yeah,
definitely. Great. And I think we'll have one final question, and then we'll wrap up for Helen's section. Amy asked, did you collaborate with the university events team, widening participation teams, etc. for the event, or was it all run by the Disability Centre?
So that's what the students have asked for. So what they wanted, it really was the whole event to be rebranded. So it was not a disability service event, it was a university event. So absolutely, you know, what you've said. So that's the idea, is that whilst the disability services are very proactive in you know, sort of help facilitating, that actually the event itself is you know, run very much student-led. So the student union, the student, you know, disabled student campaign, student what we call CAMbassadors, but student ambassadors, and work that's being done in the college. So students are, you know, being a collegiate university, the college is putting on experiences and events while the students are there in the college and the department. So actually it's a whole collegiate university student-focused event, not, as it has been in the past, a disability service event.
Great. And apologies, that was actually a question. I said it was from Amy, but Amy was passing it on from another attendee called Rebecca. So thanks for that question, Rebecca. I think we'll draw it to a close there, Helen. There are a few more questions, but maybe if people do have things that they would like to ask you, are they happy to contact the office, and maybe we could pass things on to you to look at later?
Absolutely. And if anybody, because I realised that it was just a very kind of quick 10-minute you know, scamper through what happened. So if anybody wants more details, you're really, really welcome to contact me. I'm very happy to pass on sort of more details of what we did and what it looked like and what came out of it.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And it's been great hearing from you. So that's given us lots to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
So we'll move on now to our next presentation, which is Rachel Healy from the University of Leeds. Welcome, Rachel. I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Helen, and hi, everyone. Can I just check about sharing slides? Shall I share my own, or has the NADP office still got control of the slides?
I'm more than happy to, Rachel, if you want me to share slides again.
If you would, Joe, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks. So yeah, I'm Rachel Healy from the University of Leeds. I'm part of the disability advice team. We're a team of 11, several of us are part-time, and we're part of a wider service, which is disability services. We support over 7,000 students, and we've got around maybe 1,500 disabled applicants coming each year. So of course, we're still supporting the existing students at the same time as welcoming and preparing for new students and supporting them in their transition to university. So I'm going to talk about how we do support students transitioning to study at the University of Leeds, and take you through the process and the considerations that we have. Could I have the next slide, please? So it's really about trying to get applicants into our usual processes as early as possible and letting people know the benefits to them of doing that and the importance of doing that early. Applicants can self-refer to disability services at any time. Disability services have a stall at university open days and at applicant days, and we encourage prospective students to contact us early and talk to us about support. And we try and put out a message that somebody might not identify as disabled. They might have had extra time in exams at school, and that might be as far as they've got. So there are questions around disability and identity for applicants, I think, and the language that we use. So we talk about disabled students, and we try and encourage people to consider that term in a very broad sense. So it's up to people whether they have an identity as a disabled person, but we talk about disabled students, meaning anybody that's receiving disability support from the university and anybody that might be eligible for that support. So if applicants share that they are disabled on their UCAS form or on their direct application to the university, they're added to our mailing list, or if they contact us themselves, they're added to our mailing list. And then they get monthly campaigns by email, and they're automated emails that go out to the email address that's supplied. So that's one thing we have to check. Email addresses are often linked to students' previous life, and then it might change when they become a student at university. That will change to a university email address. So we've got systems for trying to keep on top of those communications. So the monthly emails that go out talk about who we are in disability services, what we do, outline our processes, how to set up support with us, and also things like disabled students allowances, different aspects of that support, events that we might offer to applicants and also as part of induction, how to contact us and how to book in a one-to-one session or somebody to call them back. So those campaigns try and be friendly and informative and cover all the information that applicants and students starting at university who need disability support might need to know. We've also got online applicant events. They used to be in person and they went online during the pandemic and campus closure, and they've remained online partly because we have a student panel and they've fed back to us that they think online events are better currently. That's being reviewed all the time. So they're happening in May and July. We've had the May one. The applicant events are recorded. There are various members of the disability services team that present and talk about different aspects of what support is available to disabled students, how disabled students might feel at university, and some of the differences again between school and university. The July event, we're trialling an evening event for the first time because we discovered that during the pandemic, people tended to be at home and able to attend during the day, but now a lot of people are back at work or at school or college. So the student panel, it was one of their suggestions, suggested an evening event. So we've got a 6 o'clock in the evening event as the July one, and we're monitoring what helps to maximise turnout at those. We've got online checklists. That's one of the tools that we have for applicants. There's an applicant checker tool, which is it's part of the university website that's open to the public, and it step by step takes applicants through the process of, once they've applied to university, have they applied for disabled students allowances, have they registered with the university's disability services, have they got evidence of their disability. So it's got little tick boxes, yes, no, not sure, that applicants can tick, and it moves them on to the next page of the checker. So it's something people can work through step by step. It can help if we're feeling anxious about what we need to do next, and make sure that we've covered everything. We've also got a checklist for parents on a different part of the website. We do get a lot of inquiries from parents about how to support their children starting university if they've got disability related needs. So it basically says registering with disability services, providing evidence, and applying for disabled students allowances. There's a bit more information than that, but really that's the main things we think parents need to know. And there's also an evidence checker tool, which looks at different types of impairment and what kind of evidence is required by the university and by funding bodies such as Student Finance England or NHS bursaries, for example, evidence that students might need to claim disabled students allowances. So it gives examples of different kinds of evidence, medical evidence or assessment by an appropriate professional, and what level of support those different types of evidence will enable students to receive. And it can say if evidence may be sufficient or insufficient, or if they need to contact us for further information about evidence. Could I have the next slide, please? Also just to add that we put information out on social media channels. The university ones and Disability Services has Instagram and Twitter and Facebook channels, and also via academic departments right from the beginning in their student recruitment processes, and the materials they might send to students, pre-arrival information and so on. So we try our best to get that message out to students as early as possible, that if they register with us early, and even as an applicant, they don't need to be a student. If they register with us, then we can get started with the process of arranging their support so that that's done by the time they arrive and start their studies. Because what we want to try and avoid is students beginning their studies without their disability related support in place. So once applicants are known to us, we can then let them know exactly what they need to do, and they need to do two things, which is the same process as all disabled students. Just to add, they can sign up with us at any point in the course of their studies, at any point in the academic year, but I'm really trying to get people to come to us as early as possible to avoid those delays with support. But if they don't manage it, it's fine, they can register at any point. So the process of registering is to complete the sign-up form and to submit evidence. People need to do two things. The sign-up form has lots of questions, including a free text box as well. And we found that that free text box was useful to gather additional information. I'll say a bit more about that in a moment. So once students have completed that process, they've completed the sign-up form and submitted evidence, they'll get automated emails, and even if they've only completed one of them, they get added to a campaign to remind them to do the next step. So those are targeted depending on what stage of the process students have reached. And once they've completed both those steps, they'll get recommendations for reasonable adjustments and exam arrangements, and our team will pass those over to the relevant academic department, and we'll say if it's an applicant, even if they don't have a confirmed place or they've got a conditional offer, we'll still put all that support in place so that if they do end up coming to be a student at Leeds, that's set up and ready to go. Students can access help with disabled students allowances paperwork and the process. They can request callbacks from disability advisors and appointments with their disability coordinator. So that's the same level of support as an existing student that we would offer to applicants, and it doesn't matter whether they're confirmed as coming or not. And with the DSA, if they end up studying at a different university, the DSA will follow them wherever they go as a student. So that bit is useful whether they come and study at Leeds or not. And we would also encourage students, if they have applied and are considering several different universities, to register with the Disability Services at all the institutions where they might end up, so that they're getting the right level of support and the support's ready if and when they start at that institution. Next slide, please. Thanks. Yes, the sign-up form. We've added a box for pronouns recently. Students were asking for that. And the free text box, it's a space for students to add in their own words how they describe their disability and the impact, and to raise any other questions and concerns or barriers that they foresee coming to university. So we read that, and sometimes it tells us that we need to contact a student about orientation support, for example, or a personal assistant to help them to access induction events. So those sorts of things we can put in place and anticipate in advance of students coming. We've got our own evidence form. It's quite similar to the Student Finance England evidence form, but it's a University of Leeds one that's useful for students who maybe are not claiming Student Finance England funding. The idea is that they can take it to their GP to get that filled in, and that will be sufficient evidence of disability for them to get the full range of support that's available. And it took a long time for it to be approved, several years, but eventually Student Finance England have agreed that it meets their criteria. And we've also got partnerships with some medical services as well, and they've agreed to use the evidence form and understand how that works. And Disability Services has a student handbook, which is about 25 or so pages. That's updated every year, but it covers all the different aspects of what support disabled students are eligible for, how it works, how to access it. It's got flowcharts and checklists in there. So there's an online version of that, and anybody can access that. That's on the public website for the University of Leeds Disabled Students Handbook. And students can request a hard copy as well if they need that. Next slide, please. We also aim to join up with other services so students can get the support they need. There's a Students' Union Neurodivergent Society. We've got our own student panel, and new starting students can apply to be a member of that. We've got specific disability contacts in our accommodation services, which is such a useful thing to have. So if students need support in university-owned accommodation, there are named contacts that they can talk to about that. There are also welcome activities run by the residencies teams in student accommodation as part of welcome and induction. There's a sports and activity centre, a gym called The Edge. They have a scheme where students, particularly if there's mental health difficulties and students would benefit from physical exercise, there's a scheme where we can refer students for some free sessions if it would help their mental health. So we try and identify the most suitable people for that, and they get somebody who's both a personal trainer but also a welcome coach, a sort of motivational coach, and someone that's got some mental health awareness, so they can help them with tailoring a best programme to support them. There's online guides. Feeling at Home in Leeds is a series of online guides that's on the student intranet. So once students are registered, they can access those, and it covers settling into life at university and adapting to changes. It wasn't created specifically with disabled students in mind, but we do let disabled students know about that because we feel it's really useful. The Feeling at Home in Leeds team also run workshops throughout the year. So there's a theme around transition isn't something that we do at the beginning of the academic year and then it's done. There's an ongoing process around feeling like we belong and needing reinforcement of certain things and to go over information more than once. The Feeling at Home in Leeds guides are as I said, it's by the International Office. They have a website as well, the International Office, with further information for international students. And they cover the experiences of cultural differences, and there's videos and student accounts of what helped them to settle in, student stories and activities as well. And each academic department will do their own welcome, induction and transition events. So Disability Services has a pre-recorded PowerPoint presentation slides. Sorry, not pre-recorded, it has slides, and they are made available to the academic departments to use as part of their own events. If they want somebody from Disability Services to come and be a speaker, we do that as well. Next slide, please. Oh yes, I wanted to mention, it was already in the information about this event, but Harriet Cannon, who's my team manager, has produced a leaflet, I think we're calling it, a glossary and explainer, which is produced in partnership with the NADP. And it's a really useful publication that explains the differences between accessing support at school versus support at university. It includes a to-do checklist. It's got key terminology about how it's got key terminology about disability and how that's different in schools compared to universities, as well as the practices. And it also covers who to contact for help with getting disability support. So I just wanted to talk finally about things that we don't yet do that are on our radar in the disability team and things we'd like to do. So transition from year 1 to year 2 is often a pinch point for students. Year 1 at university does tend to look quite similar to school or sixth form college. There's guidance for students, they're attending lectures and seminars and given material to work through, whereas transitioning into year 2, from year 2 onwards on many university courses, students have to be much more independent learners. They might be going out on placement. They'll have to do a lot more of their own research and be even more organised and independent in how they manage their learning. And I think for disabled students in particular, particularly students that are very capable and have succeeded well in education so far, there may be undiagnosed disabilities, or students may know they have something which has never been assessed and diagnosed, and that can come to the fore in year 2 at university. And we do see that happening quite often, where students come to us saying, I've coped so far and now I'm not coping anymore, and now I need to get assessed and to get disability support in place. So I think there are 2 things there. One is trying to catch people earlier on and explain that that's a possibility, and if there's any indication that it might be a good idea to have some sort of assessment, and also bearing in mind the hugely long waiting lists for certain assessments for autism and ADHD, and even for mental health conditions, letting people know how important it is to start early, but also that people who may have had strategies and workarounds that have served them really, really well, that as the pressure and the complexity of their education increases, sometimes that's not enough and people need more formal disability support. So I think there's loads of work to do about transitioning from year 1 to year 2 at university for disabled students. We don't do an event. It was really, really brilliant to hear Helen's presentation, and I'm really inspired by what you did at the University of Cambridge, because we don't currently have anything like that for disabled students, a summer school or a pre-arrival event. And finally, something that we'd love to happen more is SENCOs in schools to start the DSA process with students. I know some of them do, and I know a lot of them are brilliant at filling in UCAS forms and doing all of that. But if students were coming to university already knowing about disabled students allowances and the support that's available and how to access that, it would help enormously, I think. The next slide, please. That's the end of my presentation. I've put thank you, but what I really want to say is, if you have any questions, I'd really love to hear from you.
Great, thank you, Rachel, for that. That was really interesting. Definitely loved the idea of your checklists. I'll be having a look at those, and someone else on the chat has said the same. Just a reminder to people, if you can, please pop your questions in the Q&A rather than the chat, just so they don't get lost. But I've seen a few coming in, so we'll try and cover as many as we can. I'm conscious of the time. We've got a question from somebody, an attendee, who said, is the sign-up form on the website, or do the students need to contact you first? What type of form is it?
It's done through Formsite, and yes, it is on the website. Students can access that themselves.
Great. And a question from Sue. She asks, you mentioned working behind the scenes with applicants. We previously did this, but it was deemed resource intensive and didn't necessarily result in places being taken up. How do you manage to argue the case with reduced resources?
Yeah, the reduced resources apply to so many areas of our work. You know, everybody's very overloaded, and we've just got this amazing team of people that go the extra mile for students. So I don't think we've had to specifically argue the case for working with applicants that might not arrive at university. But yes, we're really, really conscious that the workload is ever increasing, and we're probably going to have to look at what we can stop doing. That hasn't come up yet as something we've been asked to stop doing. So I hope, I mean, I suppose we could also argue that it saves us time and effort in the long run, and it reduces the risk of students arriving without the appropriate support. So I think we can make a case for it. In terms of the standard process, they're quite streamlined, and we've got a team of disability advisors that just put students through that process with quite standardized packages of support. So in some ways it's quicker to do that for applicants, even if we don't know they're definitely coming, than to wait and have a system to notice who's coming and who's not coming, and have they had what they need and when, and so on. So it could actually be less resource intensive to do it this way. I haven't got any stats to back that up, but I'd give it my best shot.
Thanks for that, Rachel. Heather asks, I'm very interested in all the automated contacts and online checklists you seem to have in place for students prior to coming. I'm wondering what platforms those are in. Are they accessed through the website or the intranet, where information is provided bit by bit? Is it pre-populated, or do you have to respond manually?
So we have a database which is brought in by the university, and all the student records sit on that. It's not brilliant. It's sort of, we make it do, we've got some technical wizards that seem to be able to bend the student database that we have to make it do the things that we need it to do. But it does take a lot of time, a lot of admin time, but it has functionality to send out automated email campaigns and pre-populate that with text. So there's the text is written and then emailed out to a fixed list of people that are identified according to which parts of the process they've completed or not, and then it's updated all the time. So I'm not sure if that answers your question very well, but yeah, the technical aspects are outside of the bits that I do.
That's great. Thanks, Rachel. We'll have one last question on this, and then we'll move on to Marius, because I don't want him to be running out of time as well. But so this is from Sarah. She says, how do we access the international office resources?
I think I would probably Google International Office University at Leeds. But if you wanted to contact me maybe through the NADP office, I'm really happy to send you a link.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that presentation, Rachel. That was really interesting and really useful. So I'm very grateful to you for your time. Thanks for that. If you hang around, and then if there's time at the end, if people want to ask anything, hopefully you can stay with us for that. So I'm now going to hand over to Marius Frank, who, like I said earlier, is Head of Education at Microlink. Thanks so much for joining us, Marius. Now, I think you're just going to talk through some thoughts with us, so I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Helen. Can you hear me okay? Everything good? Fantastic. Lovely. Welcome, everyone. Lovely to see so many on this call. And, well, Rachel, the numbers, yeah, 1,500, 1,700 students that you were supporting, that is just absolutely incredible. And if ever there is a statement of intent, it's captured in those numbers. A word about me before I start. I feel a little bit of imposter syndrome because I'm not in a university. My background is state education. I've been a teacher for over 30 years, and I always gravitated to those difficult schools. I don't know why, it's my life. I've loved it. I was the head teacher of a school that served, how should I describe it, an area of outstanding natural deprivation on the south side of Bristol. It was a secondary school, over 1,000 young people in it. And when I took over that school, we are talking about 1 or 2 young people every year going to university from that cohort. 1 or 2 out of a cohort of 200 kids. That was the background that I inherited. I decided very quickly that the only way my school would survive, given the academy's agenda and the intense standards agenda that was driven at the time, was to make my school as inclusive as possible and serve the community that was a heartbeat away, instead of taking the kids who lived next door and sending them to another school in the area. And to an extent, I achieved that over a decade in charge. Our performance tripled, and we did it through inclusion. After that, I was CEO of ASDAN Education, an awarding body and a charity, which works on a different way of engaging young people through curriculum resources and awards that are non-conventional. When I took over in 2010, it coincided with Michael Gove entering the Department for Education, and it's fair to say that that more expansive look at education did not go well with an academic core curriculum that was being proposed at the time. And sadly, over the last decade, we've seen more and more young people with different talents and different skills being marginalized by the curriculum and the way the curriculum is being measured than ever before. I'd love to talk to you about that, because in a way it's a form of discrimination, and it's worthy of the discussion. And now, after 8 years at Achievement for All, I've ended up as a Director of Education at a company. It's the first time I've worked outside of a charity or the public sector. But the reason why I'm here is that Microlink, who sponsor this conference, they are absolutely determined to make a difference to the lives of children and young people transiting from school into an independent and hopefully fruitful and productive life. And so I've come up with a slogan for Microlink, and that is creating opportunities from the classroom to the boardroom. Creating opportunities from pathways of opportunity from the classroom to the boardroom. Of course, that means universities. So I'd like to expand on that concept and address one of the reasons why I'm here, which is to talk about hidden disability. Now, it might amaze you to find out, but the British Dyslexia Association estimates that 70% of young people with dyslexia go unnoticed in school. 70%. I cannot believe that figure, but then once you start deconstructing what happens in the classroom, maybe, just maybe, they are absolutely right. And we're talking also about degrees and spectrums of disability that might lie below the threshold of, if you like, a notice or assessment. How can that be? And is that true? Well, I believe it is. In January this year, we worked with 80 schools on a DFE funded program, which was about assistive technologies in mainstream classes. Because what we want to do is change the narrative, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So we were working with these teachers, and we were talking about dyslexia. We were talking about conditions, how some of the tools out there can unlock things in the classroom. And one of the teachers disclosed an amazing and frightening fact. She was working with a year 13 student in school, 12 weeks away from her A-level exams. She was grade 8 on 3 musical instruments, incredibly talented, very bright. But she was refused entry to 3 musical conservatoires because they felt she didn't learn quickly enough. That young lady was diagnosed as quite severely dyslexic. 12 weeks from her A-level exams. 12 weeks. How can that be? Well, fact one, the term before that, one of the teachers was appointed as a dyslexia specialist. They were equipped to go deeper than what was there to find out these kind of things. And isn't that just amazing? The other thing is, as you all know, many young people with disabilities have spiky profiles. Spiky profiles, which means in some areas they compensate and overcome a disability they might have. And they might do it unconsciously. They do not know they're any different from anybody else. It's just the way they've learned. But then there's another group of young people who have known that they're different. And it can kind of go two ways. First of all, some of them turn into compliant, silent learners, hidden in plain sight in the classroom. They might be performing average or above average, and so schools don't take any notice of that kind of young person, but actually performing well below their capabilities. On the other hand, you've got some young people who know they are different, and they learn to unconsciously hide their disability behind layer upon layer of front. They camouflage their disability. All the teacher sees is the front, the class clown, the student who will come back with a comment or something slightly disruptive if they're pushed too hard. Sadly, that leads often to fixed term exclusions in school. Sadly, fixed term exclusions then lead to permanent exclusions. And I can say this with absolute authority, having worked with youth justice teams across the country. Over 80% of young people end up on youth justice pathways with degrees of special educational needs. It's a national disgrace. But some of those young people, when you meet them, are incredibly bright. They have so much potential, but it is blocked. So that's the kind of background we're working with. How do we address young people with hidden disability in plain sight or too noticeable in a school system, and then into further education, and then into higher education, when actually there are numerous blocks to their progress? Well, one of the models that we're looking at is to really understand what systemic barriers mean and what systemic barriers can be removed. What do I mean by a systemic barrier? I'm sure some of you have seen that lovely, lovely cartoon of three young children trying to watch a ball game. This is an American cartoon, of course, over a big wooden barrier. And the first cartoon shows equity when all three are given the same sized box. And of course, the shortest one cannot see. They cannot see over the fence. And then the second picture showed equity. That was giving the shortest young person the biggest box, so they can see the game with everyone else. But then there's the third picture, and I want you to really have this in your mind. And this third picture is when that wooden fence has been removed. It's been taken away. The systemic barrier for progress has been removed. So what can we do about these systemic barriers? How can we sort of perceive what those systemic barriers are? And how can we change the narrative? Okay. The second tool that we are using and trialing in the school sector, and understand I'm working in contentious space here, and huge apologies for people who think that I'm going too far. But what we want to try and do is get schools to adopt the social model of disability, yeah, but broaden it to include young people disabled by circumstance. It's broadening the social model of disability, I know, and it is contentious space, but so many young people are disabled because of the circumstances that surround them. The best example is the collision, I think, between poverty and progress academically. And I know your teams out there are fighting hard to remove some of those barriers, get those young people through the gates so that their true potential is increased. But there is without doubt a collision that has to be sorted. Young people who have been in school with living in poverty for the most time in their school. If you look at their cohort performance across the country, and teams like the Fisher Family Trust have gone into the data, the national cohort data in great detail, we find an interesting situation in that although the standards have risen, which government wanted to see in every other cohort, the young people who've been in poverty for the entirety of their time have made no progress as a national cohort. That's so sad. So how can we overcome some of these things like language delay and hidden disability? Let's start off in the classroom. The assistive technologies pilot decided that what we would do is show that if we normalize the use of assistive technologies in the classroom, then a much broader cohort of young people will benefit from that experience, not just the ones with identified special educational needs. Normalizing assistive technologies. What do I mean by that? Well, honestly, the progress that's been made in the last 5 years in terms of the assistive technologies that are freely available is just utterly extraordinary. Many of you are familiar, I am sure, with the learning tools that are built into Word, for example, by Microsoft. So if you have Word on your computer, there are screen filters that you can put down. You can go to line focus. Yeah, you can even have the computer read it back to you. Not very well, but it'll do it. In the last 3 or 4 years, the power of cloud computing, so all the processing is done up there in an amazingly quick amount of time and then brought back to you at your device through Office 365, the power of cloud computing has transformed that offer that was built into the platform. So now we have Immersive Reader. If you use Immersive Reader through Office 365, in other words, connected to this cloud process, yes, you have, for example, the most amazing screen filters and line filters and syllable breakdowns available. The voice reading it back to you is far more realistic. But then you have the instant ability to translate what you are reading into 90 different languages instantly. You combine then Immersive Reader with other things like OneNote and other tools that are there to help learning. And again, we immediately start to change the culture and face of the classroom. What we want to try and do is make the use of something like Immersive Reader as common in every classroom as the use of a pen and pencil. By normalizing assistive technologies, by opening up those gateways to enable it to happen, then a larger group of young people will benefit. Did it work? Well, the pilot was only for 6 weeks long, but some of the feedback we had from the teachers was utterly remarkable. One young man in year 3 or 4, that's aged 7 or 8, his frustration was huge. He would say things like, why is everybody finished their work and I haven't even started? And his Senko would say things like, look, you learn differently. You will learn differently, but it wasn't enough. After doing the assistive technologies pilot, she said, what if we gave you something that will read a book for you? And he said, what do you mean? What do you mean? And she said, well, have a look at these books. Which one do you want to read? And he pointed to one. He goes, yeah, that one. So he got the book out. They loaded Immersive Reader for the first time onto a tablet, put it over his book, and he just said, it's reading it to me. It's reading it to me. I can't believe it. It's just colossal. Wonderful to see. So you've got the possibilities there. He now wants to use it at home. Things are happening. I think one of the things I'd like to now add is what can we do now together in this journey towards how shall I say, total accessibility, if you like. There is so much we can do. We can be reaching out to schools. We can be promoting the use of things like Immersive Reader in our packages out to schools, in our pathways for students, opening up those possibilities so that inclusive practice is everywhere. We could be checking the accessibility of our websites and every single document that's put out in the university. Can you believe that? What a job. But looking at alt text for every diagram, making sure that screen readers work, because now the power of the screen readers has gone through the roof and every young person can access things in a way that was never before. The amazing thing, it's free. It goes beyond DSA. It's free. If you use something like Helperbird, I don't know if you've heard about that one. Helperbird is an app which sits in your browser, and through Helperbird, the free version, you can access Immersive Reader, and you can access it on computers, on PCs, on Windows, on Chromebooks, and also Apple devices. One tool opens up the possibilities for everyone. So the final point I'd like to make is this. How do we open up pathways for young people with hidden disabilities from the classroom through to A-level, through you and into work? It's, I believe, around the systemic barriers, understanding what those systemic barriers are and dismantling those systemic barriers. And it will prove a challenge for many colleagues. But if you normalize the use of things like assistive technologies in everything you do, that's a major, major barrier removed. I'm conscious of the time, it's 2:30, and there's so much we can talk about from the other two presenters, and maybe I've triggered your thinking about what a new normal might look like. So, Helen, can I bring you back in again?
Thank you so much for that, Maris. That was really wonderful and some great examples of what the challenges are, but also what we can do to help normalise technology in schools and all through education. At Oxford, we refer to kind of productivity tools as opposed to necessarily accessible software or assistive software to try and get that message along. Lots of people saying brilliant examples of your work. Thank you. You did talk already about the project in school. I think somebody's asking maybe for a bit more. Given the time, I'm just conscious there might be some people that are having to go. So I just want to say thank you firstly to everybody that's presented today, and those of you that have joined and maybe do have to head off. If people are able to stay on, that's fine. You're welcome to do so. But also just very quickly, I don't think in Caroline's opening she may have mentioned one of our other sponsors, Simplicity. So I also just wanted to say briefly a thank you before people run off to them as well. But yes, so if people have got questions, I can see. So Karen is saying brilliant example of UDL integrating assistive technology into children's education. And Joanna's asking, please may you say more about the work Microlink did on assistive tech learning in schools. It sounds very interesting in terms of transition to HE.
Oh, absolutely. So it was an interesting challenge, and I'm sure that the DFE won't mind me saying this, but they have funded many projects now over the last 3 years, especially because of lockdown, on tech ed. In other words, how technology can unlock learning. And then they decided to drill down into young people with disabilities. How can the classroom environment be changed? When I got involved, because of my experience, I said, hang on, it's not just young people with disability. We've got to look at a broader swathe. What about young people with hidden disability? Because let's be honest here, if a young person has an EHCP, they are more likely to get support into higher education and more likely to get support into further education. But as Rachel rightly said, there are other young people who don't know they're different and then suddenly realize these things are there. So I said, look, we've got this pilot plan. We've got 80 schools, primary and secondary. Let's come up with some way of getting change into the classroom very quickly using some of these tools. And so they went along with the idea. So the way we did it is that we came up with this idea of what we call child-centered innovation. Now, so often people dash to the innovation. Oh, great new tool, bring it into there, throw it out there, and nothing happens because people are simply overwhelmed. They don't know the story. They've already got busy day jobs. I think Rachel talked about it. Some of you guys are working 60 hours a week trying to get things solved. But if you go to a smaller level, right, you've got a technological solution, make it child-centered. Just start off with one child, start off with a conversation. And so I love the way everyone's talking about the importance of the learner voice in things. Yeah. Start off with that child-centered conversation about their learning, and then bring the technology. As I gave that 7-year-old's example, it just changed his life in one conversation and one possibility. You then demonstrate that to colleagues. Look what's working. Look what's working in the classroom. Try it. And I call it the Trojan mouse principle. Get that conversation moving, and then slowly the school will evolve. I don't believe, as a head teacher, and some of you who lead training, I hate the 2-hour PowerPoint training event. It is useless. It is useless. What you need is that constant drip of idea, discussion, feedback, disclosure, along with the people you're working with. And that's what I loved about Rachel and Helen's presentation. They both involved the learner's voice incredibly. So we did this, and over a period of 6 short weeks, the teachers felt empowered. Suddenly, for example, one school which had a migrant centre in their catchment area, they were suddenly using immersive reader at a parents' evening to instantly translate a report into Urdu, into Pashwa, which is one of the tongues, Pashkan, I think it is, one of the Ukrainian tongues, because they've suddenly had some Ukrainian young people come in. How amazing is that? And that level of commitment didn't need big sea changes in the way that systems worked. It was just an enabling tool. And I think that's what we need to have a vision of. We are on a pathway of evolution, but these tools can just slot in and speed it up, rather than everyone stop what you're doing, try this and put on. You don't want to put on another layer of complexity, do you? It's complex enough, what we have to do.
Yeah, and I think as well, given the rising numbers that people are, experiencing in the sector in all the different types of roles that we're all doing, the more that can be embedded as inclusive from the outset, hopefully the less individual bespoke discussions and arrangements are required, which hopefully the aim is less onerous on students than on practitioners.
Let's talk about the practitioners as well. There was one teacher who in the first session said, I am dyslexic. I have to wear blue tinted glasses when I'm reading. I had no idea that immersive reader was there. It's going to change my life. And another teacher said, when I went to my head of faculty and said, who's dyslexic, and said, you won't have to write out your appraisal anymore. You can dictate it in. He nearly fell off his chair. You know, it's things like that which once you start to normalize assistive technologies and everybody knows it's there and everybody uses it if they need it, then it's fine. But I have to say, one of the biggest barriers for all of us is regulated assessment. And it'd be really interesting to hear some of your comments, because I know what it's like in the secondary and the tertiary environment. We are working with the examiner regulators and the exam boards to make these technologies available. There's still a body of individuals who think that any assistive technology is somehow cheating. And that's a huge barrier to get over, because for those people who've never known disability, writing an essay is the way you actually get assessed. And if you can't write an essay, it's your fault. And sadly, that goes right to the top. If you've been through, dare I say, public school, and you've never had a barrier ever, I think that's where people like Nick Hancock have been very powerful in the last few years. You know, I think his wife is a special educational needs specialist. I think he's dyslexic as well. I'm not sure, but there are people who are now getting to the very top. Lord Addington, another one. You know, he's profoundly dyslexic and a real champion. People are making, if you like, our less neurodivergent individuals more aware of what neurodivergency means.
Great. Thank you so much again. And we've got somebody's made a comment in the Q&A as well. Regulated assessment. That's what I've been thinking about throughout, both at school and HE. I feel it's such a broad area, so fascinating, and we could, explore it, and I think do need to as a sector in detail in more depth. But I'm afraid I think we've run out of time for today's session. But I feel a webinar separately coming on with you, Marius.
With pleasure.
But thank you so much to everybody for attending today. I hope you found it useful. As I said, we will be putting a recording with captions and the BSL interpreter up on the website afterwards, so do have a look and feel free to circulate it. And just to reiterate, thanks again to everyone who's presented.